My neighbor spent $6 on a stick of butter last week and had no idea his own grandmother could have made the same thing. She could have made it in her kitchen for 80 cents in less time than it takes to boil an egg. My name is Samuel Mast. I farmed 200 acres of Amish land in Millersburg, Ohio for 30 years. We made our own butter every week, fresh cream, a jar, 5 minutes of shaking. We never bought a stick of butter from a store, not once in 30 years. I left my community and watched my neighbors pay $6 for something we made for $1. Today I'm telling you everything. Butter is one of the simplest foods that exists, and somewhere along the way, people forgot that completely. It is cream, agitated until it separates into solid fat and liquid. That's the entire science behind it. No factory equipment required. Every stick sold in a grocery store started as the exact same simple process I'm about to teach you, just at a massive scale. Let's talk about what you actually need. You need heavy cream. Nothing else is required to make real butter. Salt is optional, added purely for flavor and slightly longer shelf life, not for the butter making process itself. The cream matters more than anything. Heavy whipping cream is the only cream with enough fat content to properly separate into butter. Light cream, half and half, or coffee creamer will not work, since they simply don't contain enough fat to solidify. Check the fat content on the carton. You want cream with at least 36% fat. Most grocery store heavy cream works perfectly. Ultra-pasteurized cream works for butter, but not quite as well as regular pasteurized cream. The extreme heat changes the fat structure slightly. Raw cream, if you have access to it, makes the richest, most flavorful butter of all, the same way Amish farms always did it. Now, temperature. This is the detail most people skip, and it's the biggest reason a first attempt takes longer than it should. Cream separates fastest at 60 degrees, slightly cooler than room temperature but warmer than the refrigerator. Take your cream out about 30 minutes before you start. Let it sit on the counter to come up to that ideal range. Pour your heavy cream into a clean, dry glass jar with a tight-fitting lid. A simple mason jar works perfectly. Fill it no more than halfway, since the cream needs plenty of empty space to move around and properly agitate. Secure the lid tightly. A loose lid means cream leaking out during shaking, making a mess and wasting your cream. Now, shake the jar vigorously, up and down, for several minutes. Your arm will get tired, and that's normal. In the first minute or two, the cream will simply slosh around. The fat molecules are just beginning to break apart. Around the 3-minute mark, the cream will suddenly thicken noticeably, transforming into something resembling whipped cream. Push through this stage. Around the 5-minute mark, the texture breaks, and you'll hear a splashing, sloshing sound return. Open the jar. You'll see solid yellow clumps of butter floating in buttermilk. This is the exact moment cream has become butter. Pour the contents through a fine strainer set over a bowl. Save that buttermilk. Don't pour it down the drain. Press the butter clumps together gently with a spoon or clean hands, working them into a single solid mass. This is real butter, made in your own kitchen, from one ingredient, in about 5 minutes of physical effort. No factory, no dairy plant, just cream, motion, and patience through that whipped cream stage that fools most people. Now let's talk about washing the butter, since this is the step that decides whether your butter lasts 2 days or 2 months. Fresh butter still holds small amounts of leftover buttermilk trapped inside it, even after straining. That buttermilk is the reason store-bought butter without preservatives turns sour so fast once opened. Washing removes it completely, and this single step is what let Amish households keep butter fresh for weeks without any refrigeration at all. Fill a bowl with ice-cold water. Place your strained butter into this water and press it firmly with the back of a wooden spoon. You'll see cloudy, white liquid releasing into the water immediately. That cloudiness is the remaining buttermilk working its way out. Pour off this cloudy water and replace it with fresh cold water. Press and fold the butter again the same way. Repeat this process 3 to 4 times until the water you pour off stays completely clear instead of cloudy. This step matters more than people expect. Skipping it leaves enough buttermilk behind that the butter will turn sour within a few days. A properly washed butter, with every trace of buttermilk removed, behaves completely differently, staying fresh and mild for weeks. Cold water matters here specifically. Warm water starts melting the butterfat itself, losing texture and making the process messy. Keep adding ice if needed to keep the water cold throughout every round of washing. Once your water runs completely clear, you're finished washing. Press the butter one final time to remove any excess water. Then pat it dry gently with a clean cloth. Now let's talk about salt, an optional but important step. Salt in butter serves 2 purposes. First, flavor, and second, mild preservation by drawing out remaining moisture. For lightly salted butter, use about 1/4 teaspoon of fine salt per ½ pound of finished butter. Work it in thoroughly, using a spoon or clean hands, folding and pressing until the salt disappears completely. For a saltier farmhouse style, used for longer storage without refrigeration, use closer to 1 full teaspoon per ½ pound. This stronger salt content extends room temperature shelf life noticeably compared to unsalted versions. Unsalted butter, preferred for baking, skips this entirely. Just remember it has a shorter shelf life. Now let's talk about shaping and storing. This turns a mass of fat into something that looks like real butter. Shape the butter into a block or a log using your hands, or press it into a small butter dish or mold. Wrap the shaped butter tightly in parchment paper, twisting the ends closed like a piece of candy. Avoid plastic wrap for long-term storage, since butter can absorb odors from plastic over time. For short-term storage, this can sit in a cool pantry or countertop butter dish, away from sunlight. For longer storage, beyond 2 weeks, refrigeration extends shelf life to a month or more. Freezing extends it even further, up to 6 months, with almost no change in flavor or texture. Now, about that leftover buttermilk. It has real uses beyond simply being a byproduct. This traditional buttermilk is thinner and less tangy than the cultured version sold in stores. Use it in pancake or biscuit recipes. It adds the same tenderizing quality to baked goods. It also works well as a base for salad dressings, mixed with vinegar, salt, and fresh herbs. Amish kitchens used this often, especially during summer, when fresh herbs were growing right outside the door. Nothing produced from milk in an Amish kitchen was ever considered waste. Simply a different ingredient. Let's talk about yield. 1 pint of heavy cream produces roughly 8 ounces of finished butter. A standard quart of heavy cream yields close to 1 pound of butter, matching a store-bought box. You've made it fresh in your own kitchen for a fraction of the price. Enjoy your handmade butter. Let's talk about faster methods now. Since shaking a jar by hand works fine for a small batch, but isn't practical for a full household, a stand mixer turns this 5-minute jar method into an even faster, less tiring process. Pour room temperature heavy cream into the mixing bowl. Run it on medium-high speed using the whisk attachment. The cream goes through stages: thin liquid, whipped cream, then breaking into butter and buttermilk. This usually takes 3 to 4 minutes. The motor maintains a constant, even speed without the natural slowdown that happens as your arm tires. Cover the bowl loosely with a clean towel or use a splash guard. As the cream breaks, it splashes more than you'd expect. A food processor works similarly, using the standard blade. Pulse in short bursts rather than running continuously, checking the texture every 30 seconds. Amish households had none of these electric options. The traditional tool was a butter churn, a wooden barrel with a hand-cranked or plunger mechanism. A quart jar today essentially recreates the same physical principle a churn used for 2 centuries, just on a smaller scale for a modern kitchen. If you want to make larger batches, a half-gallon jar works, though shaking becomes difficult. This is where a stand mixer becomes worth using. Let's talk about flavored butter now, since plain butter is only the starting point once you understand the basic method. Herb butter is the simplest variation, made by folding fresh chopped herbs into the finished, washed butter before shaping it into a block. Rosemary, thyme, and chives were common on Amish farms, growing easily in most home gardens without special care. Honey butter, a favorite for fresh bread, is made by folding 2 to 3 tablespoons of honey into a ½ pound of unsalted butter. Garlic butter, useful for cooking, is made by folding minced garlic into salted butter. This works especially well melted over steak. Cinnamon butter combines ground cinnamon with honey or brown sugar. This was often served with warm biscuits on cold mornings. Let's talk about ghee now. Ghee is butter with milk solids and water removed through slow cooking, leaving pure butterfat behind. Place your finished butter in a saucepan over low heat. Let it melt slowly, then continue cooking gently as it begins to foam. Skim off this white foam. The remaining milk solids at the bottom will turn golden brown, and the liquid will turn a clear, deep gold. Strain this liquid through cheesecloth into a clean jar. What's left is pure ghee, which stores safely at room temperature for months. A pound of heavy cream costs between $4 and $6. This produces close to 1 pound of butter, plus a cup of buttermilk. A pound of quality butter at a store costs $5 to $8, and up to $12 for specialty European-style butters. Homemade butter consistently outperforms most store butter in flavor, especially compared to brands containing stabilizers or lower butterfat content. Access to raw cream from a local farm cuts your cost further, while producing a noticeably richer, more flavorful result. Let's talk about troubleshooting now, since even a process this simple can go wrong in a few predictable ways. And knowing the fix ahead of time saves you from wasting a batch of good cream. If your cream won't separate at all, even after 10 or 15 minutes of steady shaking, the most common cause is temperature. Cream that's too cold moves too slowly for the fat molecules to properly collide and clump together. Stop, let the jar sit on the counter for 10 minutes to warm slightly, then resume shaking. This small pause fixes the issue more often than any other adjustment you could make. A second, less common cause of cream refusing to separate is a jar filled to full. If the cream has no room to splash and move freely inside the jar, agitation slows down dramatically, no matter how vigorously you shake. Pour off a portion into a second jar if this happens, giving both batches more room to move. If your cream separates but produces very little actual butter, mostly liquid with only tiny flecks of fat floating in it, the cream likely didn't have enough fat content to begin with. Always check that fat percentage on the carton before you start, since this single number determines whether your effort produces real butter. If your butter comes out unusually soft and won't hold a shape even after washing, it likely got too warm during the process, from handling it too long with bare hands during washing and shaping. Chill the butter in the refrigerator for 20 minutes, then reshape it once it's firmed back up slightly, using a wooden spoon or paddle instead of bare hands during the final shaping step also helps keep the butter cooler throughout. If your finished butter tastes sour or off within a day or two, the washing step was likely incomplete. Go back and wash more thoroughly next time, continuing until the water runs completely clear, not just mostly clear. If your butter has a grainy, slightly gritty texture rather than smooth, the cream was agitated too aggressively for too long. If your butter smells faintly like the refrigerator, this happens because butterfat absorbs surrounding odors extremely easily. Store your finished butter away from strong-smelling items like onions or garlic, whether in the refrigerator or a pantry. Let's talk about scaling this into a weekly habit now. Replacing store-bought butter entirely, the way Amish households did. A household using 1 pound of butter weekly needs roughly 1 quart of heavy cream to keep up with that pace. If you have access to a local farm selling raw milk, you can skim your own cream first, rather than buying heavy cream. This is exactly how Amish households sourced their cream. The milking happened daily, and the cream was saved for churning. Let's talk about one more traditional detail worth understanding: the color of homemade butter. In spring and summer, when cows graze on fresh green grass, cream naturally produces a deeper, richer yellow butter. In winter, when animals eat stored hay instead of fresh grass, butter naturally turns paler, sometimes almost white. Homemade butter sometimes contains a slightly higher water content than commercial butter, which can affect precise baking. If you notice your pastry dough feels slightly wetter, simply reduce any added liquid in the recipe by 1 to 2 tablespoons. Always start with cream that's properly refrigerated, brought to 60 degrees only briefly, right before churning. Salted butter, properly washed, can sit safely at room temperature in a cool pantry for 1 to 2 weeks. Unsalted butter should move to the refrigerator sooner, within just a few days, since it lacks that extra layer of protection. If you ever notice an off smell or sign of mold, discard the batch. Trusting your senses matters here. Here is everything laid out clearly, so you can make your first batch today without needing to reread anything twice. You need one thing only: heavy cream, at least 36% fat, brought to around 60 degrees before you start. Salt is optional, added after churning, purely for taste and slightly longer shelf life. Pour the cream into a jar, filled no more than halfway. Seal it tight, shake for about 5 minutes, pushing past the whipped cream stage until you hear that distinct splashing sound return. Strain the solid butter away from the liquid buttermilk. Wash the butter in cold water 3 to 4 times until the water runs clear. Salt it if you'd like. Shape it, wrap it in parchment paper. That is the entire process, start to finish, the same 5 steps my grandmother repeated every week of her life, without ever once thinking of it as complicated or special. Cream, jar, shake, wash, shape. Compare this to what a stick of butter actually represents at the store. A dairy plant, a supply chain, packaging, transportation, and a markup sitting on top of every single one of those steps. None of that changes the taste of the butter itself. It only changes what you pay for something that started as the same simple process. If you're making this a regular habit, keep a running note of your cream cost each week. After a month, you'll see the real numbers for your own household. The actual gap between what you're spending and store charges. Try the flavored versions once you're comfortable with plain butter, honey butter for breakfast, garlic butter for basting a steak, herb butter for fresh bread straight from the oven. Each variation costs almost nothing beyond what you're already making, since the base process never changes. If you want butter that lasts even longer without refrigeration, take it one step further into ghee, cooking off the remaining milk solids until you're left with pure, golden butterfat that keeps at room temperature for months. This was the version Amish households often made specifically for warmer months, when even a cool pantry couldn't match refrigeration. My grandmother never separated butter making from the rest of her week. It sat alongside washing, baking, and every other task, done without complaint and without needing a recipe card. Since her hands had done it so many times, the motion became automatic. That is the real lesson underneath everything I've taught you. Butter was never meant to be complicated. It became complicated only once it left the farmhouse kitchen and turned into something manufactured, packaged, and sold back to people who forgot they could still make it themselves in 5 minutes with a jar they probably already own. Start this week. 1 quart of cream, 1 jar, 5 minutes of shaking. You'll never look at that $6 stick of butter the same way again.